I want you to do something for me right now. Just pause whatever you're doing and take a look at your wrist.
Yeah, check the watch.
Right. What is your smartwatch doing at this exact moment? Like, is it just sitting there silently judging you for only logging, maybe 3,000 steps today?
Oh, it really has become the ultimate modern guilt trip. I mean, you look down to check the time, and instead you are met with this tiny glowing ring that loudly communicates your total lack of cardiovascular ambition for the afternoon.
It is totally a tiny judgmental companion. But we actually have a stack of research today that completely shifts the paradigm of what these devices really are.
A massive shift.
Yeah. We are looking at this fascinating new excerpt in a report from the American Academy of Neurology, the AAN. It's titled The Neurology of Wearables: Digital Insight versus Data Anxiety.
A great read.
It completely blew my mind because it maps out how that little piece of glass and metal on your wrist has quietly evolved. It went from a glorified pedometer into a legitimate, heavy-hitting neurological tool.
The shift documented here is, well, it's profound. We are entirely past the era of just tracking calories burned on an elliptical.
Right.
Neurologists are now actively recognizing and integrating these sensors to monitor life-altering medical events, like in real time.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for this deep dive is twofold. First, we need to understand the underlying mechanics of this massive technological leap.
Yeah, how we got here.
Exactly. How did we get from counting steps to monitoring brain health?
Yeah.
And second, we have to navigate this incredibly fine line the researchers highlight, the psychological razor's edge between life-saving digital insight and absolutely crippling data anxiety.
What's fascinating here is the sheer velocity of this transition. For years, the medical establishment viewed wearables as, just consumer novelties. Toys, basically.
Right, fitness gadgets.
Exactly. But the sensors have become so sophisticated, capturing this continuous high-fidelity biometric data, that the field of neurology is basically being forced to adapt.
Yeah.
The recent findings highlight two major breakthroughs that solidify these devices as critical medical infrastructure. First is the ability to predict epilepsy seizures before they happen.
Yeah, predict them.
Yes. And second, the capacity to catch the very early subtle signs of a stroke.
The scale of that leap is just wild to me. The analogy that comes to mind is, it's like we took a basic solar-powered pocket calculator, gutted it, and just shoved a quantum supercomputer into the exact same plastic casing.
That's a pretty accurate way to look at it, actually.
But what really gets me is the mechanism here, because it's acting almost like a seismograph for the nervous system, right? The watch is on your wrist, which is nowhere near your brain.
Right, it's on the periphery.
So how is the exact same sensor that shames you about your step count detecting an impending seizure inside your skull?
The seismograph analogy is actually the perfect way to conceptualize this. I mean, a seismograph doesn't sit at the exact epicenter of an earthquake, right?
No, it's usually miles away.
Exactly. It sits miles away and detects the peripheral tremors traveling through the earth. Your smartwatch is doing the exact same thing via the autonomic nervous system.
Oh, interesting.
The brain and the heart are in constant bidirectional communication. They primarily talk through the vagus nerve. So when the brain is about to experience an electrical storm, which is essentially what a seizure is, it sends out chaotic distress signals.
Yeah, on the vagus nerve.
Yes, down the vagus nerve long before the physical convulsions actually start.
So the watch isn't looking at the brain at all. It's looking at the downstream collateral damage of the brain's electrical misfiring.
You nailed it.
Yep.
It is looking for microscopic cascading changes in your peripheral physiology. The sensors are tracking minute fluctuations in heart rate variability, or HRV.
Okay.
They're also measuring electrodermal activity, so tiny shifts in how much your skin sweats, which is a direct proxy for sympathetic nervous system arousal.
It measures your sweat.
Just tiny, imperceptible amounts of it, yeah. To predict an epilepsy seizure, the algorithms establish a baseline of what your unique, healthy nervous system looks like over millions of data points.
Wow. Okay.
Then, when it detects a specific, highly mathematical cluster of deviations, say a sudden crash in HRV coupled with an unexplained spike in skin conductance, it recognizes the biometric signature of an impending seizure and flags it.
That is amazing. But how does that apply to detecting a stroke? Because a stroke is a plumbing problem in the brain, like a blocked artery or a bleed, right? It's not necessarily an electrical storm like a seizure.
That's a great distinction. With a stroke, the device relies heavily on its internal accelerometers and gyroscope.
The movement trackers.
Exactly, combined with continuous blood oxygenation monitoring. The algorithms are looking for the earliest physiological whispers of motor deficit.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, let's say you are walking. The watch knows your standard gait, your cadence, the specific arc of your arm swing.
Right, because it's been tracking me for months.
Exactly. So if a microscopic clot begins to restrict blood flow in the motor cortex of your brain, your arm swing on one side of your body might alter by just a few degrees.
Oh, wow.
Your cadence might become slightly asymmetrical. You wouldn't even notice it yet.
So you feel totally fine.
You feel fine, but the watch detects that subtle mechanical failure. It cross-references it with a slight drop in peripheral blood oxygen and realizes you are entering a neurological crisis.
That is absolutely staggering. And the reason this matters so much, the reason neurologists are taking this so seriously is because of the window of time. I know in neurology there is that common phrase, time is brain.
It is the governing principle of stroke treatment. During an ischemic stroke, millions of neurons die every single minute that the brain is deprived of oxygen.
Every single minute.
Every minute. The ischemic penumbra, which is the area of brain tissue that is at risk but still salvageable, shrinks incredibly fast.
So early detection is literally everything.
It's everything. If a wearable can detect the onset of a stroke and trigger an emergency response before the patient even fully realizes their speech is slurring, well, that device is no longer a gadget.
No, definitely not.
It is a critical intervention tool. It can literally mean the difference between full recovery and permanent paralysis.
And this constant 247 wrist monitoring, it completely changes the dynamic of how we interact with the medical system in general. Because let's be honest, human memory is notoriously, almost comically flawed when we actually make it to the doctor's office.
Oh, entirely. Human recall is arguably the greatest bottleneck in modern clinical medicine.
Right.
A neurologist's diagnosis has historically been completely dependent on a patient's ability to accurately articulate their physiological history over a long period of time.
The documentation points out this massive gap between visits, which I found so relatable. We have all experienced this exact, incredibly frustrating scenario.
The sitting on the exam table scenario.
Yes. You wait 3 months for a specialist appointment. You sit down in the examination room, the paper on the table crinkles, the doctor looks at you and asks, "So, how have you been sleeping the last 6 months?"
And you just draw a total blank.
You just freeze. I mean, most people cannot remember what they ate for lunch on Tuesday, let alone accurately summarize 180 consecutive nights of complex sleep architecture.
It's an impossible question. The pressure of that clinical environment distorts reality. You are asked to average out half a year of biological function on the spot.
Yeah, which just doesn't work.
It doesn't. Human memory is entirely beholden to recency bias and emotional state. If you slept terribly the night before the appointment, you will likely tell the doctor your sleep has been awful for months.
Even if it hasn't been.
Right. Or conversely, if you had a great week, you might downplay severe chronic insomnia that occurred 2 months prior. We filter our biological history through the lens of our current mood.
We are just completely unreliable narrators of our own bodies.
Which is why continuous biometric data fundamentally reshapes the diagnostic process. It replaces that subjective, faulty human recall with objective tracking.
So the doctor can just look at the data.
Exactly. A doctor doesn't have to rely on your vague feeling about your fatigue. They can look at the dashboard and see that on the second week of February, your deep sleep plummeted by 40%.
Wow.
Your resting heart rate elevated by 10 beats per minute, and your respiratory rate changed. The memory gap is bridged by a perfect, unblinking digital record.
I understand the clinical utility of that, but having 247 objective data mediating the relationship between a doctor and a patient, it brings up a pretty significant philosophical issue.
It definitely does.
Like, are we just turning patients into literal data ports? You walk into the clinic, the doctor plugs into your ecosystem, downloads the CSV file of your life, and completely bypasses the subjective human experience of suffering.
That is a very real fear.
Right, because if my watch says I'm sleeping perfectly, but I sit in the chair and tell the doctor I feel like I'm falling apart, does the algorithm override my reality?
The risk of algorithmic invalidation is actually a massive concern in the medical community right now. If clinical medicine becomes overly reliant on the digital dashboard, we run the risk of practicing medicine devoid of actual healing.
Just treating the numbers.
Exactly. The numbers might look fine, but if the patient's lived experience is one of pain or exhaustion, dismissing them just because the wearable didn't flag an anomaly is incredibly dangerous.
It basically creates a scenario where you have to prove to a machine that you are sick before a human will even believe you.
And the most progressive thinkers in neurology are trying to prevent that exact dystopia. The goal isn't for the data to replace the conversation.
Right.
The goal is for the data to serve as the baseline for a much deeper inquiry.
How does that look in practice?
Well, instead of spending 15 minutes interrogating you just to establish a basic timeline of symptoms, the doctor can look at the objective timeline and say, hey, the data shows a massive physiological stress response in early March, but you're telling me you felt fine. Let's dig into what was happening in your life right then.
Okay, I like that. The data should anchor the human context, not erase it.
Exactly.
So ideally, the watch handles the administrative memory work, allowing the human beings in the room to focus on the nuances of care. But handing a patient a 247 objective data stream creates a completely different problem outside the doctor's office.
Oh, absolutely. The anxiety factor.
Yeah, we aren't wired to have a real-time dashboard for our internal organs. And staring at those numbers all day is triggering a massive spike in psychological distress.
It really is. It's generating an entirely new category of hypochondria and psychological burden.
The researchers issue a stark warning about the dark side of this continuous tracking. It is stressing people out and creating a very specific modern type of anxiety.
Yes, data anxiety.
And I think anyone listening right now who wears one of these devices knows exactly what this feels like. You are sitting at your desk just answering emails. Suddenly, your wrist taps you.
The dreaded tap.
Right. You look down and the screen is glowing red, telling you your resting heart rate is unusually high or your rhythm is irregular.
And your heart drops.
Literally. The immediate human reaction is never a calm, rational analysis of the data. The immediate reaction is to open a browser, start Googling symptoms, spiral into worst-case scenarios, and mentally plan your own funeral before you've even stood up from your chair.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human evolution, it makes perfect psychological sense why we react with such intense panic.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, we are biologically wired for survival. Our nervous systems evolved to respond to immediate, tangible threats, like a predator or a physical injury.
Right, running from a lion.
Exactly. We did not evolve to receive push notifications about subclinical physiological anomalies.
That is such a good point.
When a supposedly infallible machine taps you on the wrist and suggests there is a flaw in your most vital organ, it instantly triggers the sympathetic nervous system.
The fight or flight response.
Yes, your brain perceives an existential threat and just dumps adrenaline and cortisol straight into your bloodstream.
And the bitter irony there is that the adrenaline dump causes your heart rate to spike even further, which the watch then records and feeds back to you as more alarming data.
Precisely. It forces you into a feedback loop of pure panic.
Just a terrible cycle.
It is a self-fulfilling cycle of physiological stress. The core issue driving this anxiety is the presentation of raw, highly sensitive medical data without any clinical context.
Right, because I'm not a doctor.
No, you're not. When a neurologist runs an EEG or an ECG in a hospital, they don't just hand the patient a printout of the jagged lines and walk out of the room.
That would be terrifying.
It would be. They interpret it. They explain what is a normal variance, what is a statistical artifact, and what actually requires intervention.
But the watch doesn't do that.
No. A wearable drops raw, uninterpreted medical data into the middle of your Tuesday afternoon with zero emotional support. It forces the average consumer to act as their own specialized medical interpreter, which is a role they are entirely unqualified to perform.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This anxiety doesn't just stem from a general overload of information. The researchers explicitly identified the dual threats that make this technology so psychologically treacherous.
The false alarms and the false reassurances.
Exactly. They categorize them as false alarms and false reassurances. Because for all of this quantum computer level advancement we talked about, we are placing our ultimate trust in technology that is still prone to fundamental physics and sensor errors.
The false alarm is arguably the most common negative experience users have, and it goes far beyond a simple software glitch.
What causes it then?
Well, these devices primarily rely on optical photoplethysmography, or PPG sensors for short.
Okay, PPG sensors.
They shine green LED lights into the capillary beds of your wrist and measure the light that bounces back to calculate the volume of blood pulsing through your veins.
That sounds like a brilliant piece of engineering.
It is, but it's highly susceptible to motion artifacts.
Meaning the physical movement of your arm confuses the light sensor.
Exactly. Let's say you are jogging or even doing something as mundane as vigorously chopping vegetables.
Chopping vegetables.
Yeah. The rhythmic, repetitive movement of your wrist can create what engineers call cadence lock.
Cadence lock.
The watch's accelerometer and optical sensor get confused by the sloshing of the blood and the ambient light leaking under the watch face.
Oh, I see.
So the algorithm accidentally locks onto the rhythm of your footsteps or the chopping motion rather than your actual heartbeat.
Oh, wow.
The watch misinterprets this chaotic sensor noise as atrial fibrillation, which is a dangerous irregular heartbeat, and sends you a critical health alert.
So you are perfectly healthy, just making dinner, and suddenly your watch tells you that you are going into cardiac arrest because it misread the physics of a chef's knife.
Pretty much. And the panic that ensues is visceral. False alarms drive a massive number of patients to the emergency room, wasting critical medical resources.
And money.
Yes, costing thousands of dollars in unnecessary testing and inflicting genuine acute physiological stress on the user for absolutely no reason.
That is so frustrating.
The tool designed to monitor your health actively harms your mental health and spikes your blood pressure just because of a trick of the light.
Which is terrifying. But the other side of that coin seems almost even more insidious to me. The false reassurance.
The false reassurance occurs when a user is experiencing genuine physical symptoms of distress.
Like what?
Perhaps they feel a subtle tightness in their chest, unusual shortness of breath, or persistent aura that precedes a neurological event. They feel that something is deeply wrong.
Their body is warning them.
Exactly. But instead of trusting their body, they look down at their wrist. The watch, perhaps failing to capture the specific metric of that particular ailment, displays a green check mark and says, all biometrics are normal.
So they outsource their biological trust entirely to the machine.
They allow the digital readout to override their physical reality. The patient thinks, well, the Apple Watch or the Garmin says, my ECG is fine, so this chest pain must just be indigestion.
Wow.
They rationalize their suffering because the algorithm didn't validate it.
I want to push on that dynamic for a second. When we look at these two specific outcomes, the false alarm and the false reassurance, which of those is actually more dangerous to our overall health?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Is it the sheer visceral panic and the systemic drain on emergency rooms caused by a false alarm? Or is it the blind, almost numb comfort of a false reassurance?
From a purely neurological and physiological standpoint, the false reassurance carries a substantially higher risk of a catastrophic outcome. Yes. A false alarm creates temporary, acute psychological distress. It is unpleasant, and it wastes hospital resources, sure, but the patient usually goes home physically unharmed once the doctors confirm it was a sensor error.
Right. Their heart is actually fine.
But a false reassurance, however, actively delays critical time-sensitive care.
Oh, it goes back to time is brain.
Exactly. If a patient is ignoring the early physical signs of an ischemic stroke or a myocardial infarction because their smartwatch hasn't flagged an anomaly, they might miss the highly specific therapeutic window for administering clot-busting drugs.
They miss their chance.
The false reassurance acts as a silencer on our innate biological warning systems. It convinces a patient to stay on the couch and wait it out when they should be calling an ambulance immediately.
That is deeply unsettling. It is the equivalent of smelling thick smoke in your house, but refusing to leave because an app on your phone says the ambient temperature in the living room is normal.
That is a perfect analogy.
You are literally letting a limited sensor suite override your own survival instincts.
The device is, ultimately, a single node measuring a highly limited set of variables from the surface of your skin.
Right.
Your body, on the other hand, is an infinitely complex network of billions of sensors. It has evolved over millions of years to alert you when its homeostasis is threatened. We cannot allow a digital readout to hold more authority than the physical reality of human suffering.
So what does this all mean? I mean, we have journeyed from the mundane annoyance of a step counter to the marvel of a device that tracks vagus nerve tremors to predict a seizure.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And we've walked right into the terrifying reality of a sensor that can either give you a panic attack over topping vegetables or convince you to ignore a literal stroke. How do we synthesize all of this?
It's all about balance.
Yeah, the ultimate takeaway from the neurology community seems to boil down to how we define the role of the device in our hierarchy of trust. The researchers phrase it brilliantly. They say at the end of the day, your smartwatch is an amazing tool, but it is a conversation starter, not a medical degree.
That phrase perfectly encapsulates the digital maturity we need to develop.
Digital maturity, I like that.
The medical establishment does not want to discard these devices. The life-saving potential of continuous biometric tracking is simply too profound to ignore. We finally have a way to bridge the memory gap and provide objective data to physicians.
Which is huge.
It is. But we have to fundamentally recalibrate our psychological relationship with the hardware. We must treat the data as a prompt to ask questions.
Not an answer in itself.
Right. Ask questions either to ourselves about our lifestyle or to our doctors during a visit. But we cannot treat every push notification as a definitive, infallible medical diagnosis.
It requires a massive shift in perspective. We have to be willing to look at the data, acknowledge the alert, but then forcefully apply our own human context and professional medical context before we allow the algorithm to dictate our actions or our emotional state.
We have to remember that the wearable works for us. We do not work for the wearable. Its job is to passively monitor the background noise of our physiology and occasionally raise its hand to suggest we look into a pattern. Our job is to maintain final, absolute authority over our own health decisions and our own peace of mind.
That brings me to a final thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. Something to mull over as you go about the rest of your day, which really builds on this entire theme of biological tracking and false reassurances.
Okay.
We talked about the danger of ignoring our own symptoms because the screen says we are fine. But let's take that a step further into the future.
Where does this lead us?
Exactly. There is this concept in biology called interoception. It is essentially our eighth sense. It's our brain's ability to perceive sensations inside our body, to feel our own heartbeat, to sense our own digestion, to intuitively know our own physical state.
It's vital.
It is. So if we increasingly rely on our watches and our external devices to start the medical conversation, and if we constantly look down at our wrists to validate our internal states, will we eventually lose that ability?
That's a scary thought.
If a glowing piece of glass is constantly translating how our body is doing, might we eventually forget how to simply feel how we are doing?
That raises a profound question about the future of human embodiment, because interoception is a muscle.
Right.
The more we outsource that internal awareness to an external digital dashboard, the more our own natural evolutionary instincts might atrophy.
We just lose touch.
We risk becoming strangers in our own bodies, just waiting for a machine to tell us how we feel.
So for today, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I highly encourage you to take that silent judging piece of metal and glass off your wrist for just a few hours today. Unplug the data stream, take a walk without counting the steps, and just try to listen to what your body is telling you, all on its own. Catch you next time.